Imagine spending 27 years behind prison walls, stripped of your freedom, all for fighting against an unjust system. What would you do when you finally walked free? Would you seek revenge? Or would you choose a different path? For one man, the choice was clear. His name is Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela. When he emerged from that long darkness, he didn't call for retribution. He called for reconciliation. This is the incredible story of a man who became a global symbol of resistance, sacrifice, and the ultimate triumph of human dignity. He wasn't just a political prisoner. He was the architect of a new nation. He dismantled the brutal system of apartheid and taught the world that forgiveness is a more powerful weapon than hate. Join us as we explore the life of the man who changed South Africa forever. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that inspire. Nelson Mandela. The name itself is a symbol of freedom, justice, and resilience. But how did a young boy from a small village in South Africa grow up to become a global icon of peace? This is the story of his early years, the foundation upon which a legend was built. Our story begins on July 18, 1918, in the quiet village of Mvizo, nestled in South Africa's Eastern Cape. Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela was born into the Thembu royal family. This wasn't just a title. It was an environment steeped in leadership and tradition. His father, Gadla Henry Mfakani-Iswa, was a respected local chief and an advisor to the Thembu king. From his earliest days, Mandela was surrounded by discussions of governance and justice. He saw firsthand how leaders were expected to serve their people. His birth name, Rolihlahla, is a Xhosa word that literally means pulling the branch of a tree, but is more commonly understood as troublemaker. It's a name that seems almost prophetic, hinting at the man who would one day shake the very foundations of an unjust system. But his path to becoming that troublemaker for injustice was shaped by a profound personal loss. When Mandela was still a boy, his father passed away. Following this tragedy, he was adopted by Chief John Ntaba Dalindibo, the acting regent of the Thembu people. This move placed him at the heart of royal life in Mkhekezweni, the Thembu capital. It was here, in the Great Place, that he learned some of his most valuable lessons. He would sit and listen as the regent held meetings, observing how disputes were settled and decisions were made. He saw leadership that wasn't about command, but about consensus. The regent would listen to every man speak until an agreement was reached. This democratic and inclusive approach left a deep impression on young Mandela and would later become a cornerstone of his own political philosophy. His formal education began at local missionary schools, a common path for many at the time. It was during this period that a teacher gave him the English name Nelson, a widespread colonial practice of assigning European names to African children. He excelled in his studies, showing a keen intellect and a thirst for knowledge. This led him to Clarkberry Boarding Institute and later to Heldtown, a prestigious Methodist college. These institutions were known for their strict discipline and academic rigor. At Heldtown, Mandela wasn't just learning subjects from a book. He was developing a powerful sense of self-respect, independence, and a fierce commitment to fairness. He began to see the world not just as it was, but as it should be. In 1939, a new chapter began. Mandela enrolled at the University of Fort Hare, one of the very few universities open to Black South Africans. Fort Hare was more than just a campus. It was a vibrant hub of African intellectualism and budding political thought. It was a place where future leaders from across the continent were being forged. Here, Mandela's worldview expanded dramatically. He engaged in debates, joined the Students' Representative Council, and became immersed in the growing currents of African nationalism. However, his time at Fort Hare was cut short. True to his name, Rolihlahla, he became a leader in a student protest against the university's policies. The administration demanded that he and the other student leaders compromise their principles. Mandela refused. He believed that a leader must be prepared to lead from the front, even if it meant sacrifice. For his unwavering stance, he was expelled. This early act of defiance was a powerful sign of the man he was becoming, someone who would not back down in the face of injustice, no matter the personal cost. After leaving Fort Hare, his guardian, the regent, arranged a marriage for him. But Mandela, yearning for independence and a life of his own choosing, decided to run away. He and his cousin Justice secretly fled to the bustling, chaotic city of Johannesburg, the City of Gold. This was a world away from the rural life he knew. He arrived with nothing but his determination. Life in Johannesburg was a harsh teacher. To survive, he took a job as a night watchman at a gold mine, a stark and brutal introduction to the realities of the racial and economic exploitation that defined South African society. But he never lost sight of his goal. While working grueling hours, he dedicated himself to finishing his degree through correspondence with the University of South Africa, or UNISA. His journey then led him to the world of law. Through a connection with a fellow activist, Walter Sisulu, Mandela began working as a law clerk. This was his entry point into the legal profession and a pivotal moment in his political awakening. He enrolled to study law at the University of the Witwatersrand, where he was one of a handful of black students in a predominantly white institution. Here, he experienced the daily humiliations and systemic barriers of segregation firsthand. But he also formed crucial friendships with people from all racial backgrounds who shared his passion for equality. People like Joe Slovo and Ruth First. Studying law did more than just prepare Mandela for a career. It gave him the tools to fight apartheid. He learned the language of the system he sought to dismantle. He saw how the law was being twisted to enforce oppression, and he resolved to use that same law as a weapon for liberation. His education wasn't just about accumulating facts. It was about sharpening his mind, clarifying his morals, and strengthening his resolve. Every lecture, every book, and every debate fueled the fire within him. These early years, from the royal crawl of the Thembu to the segregated classrooms of Johannesburg, were the crucible in which Nelson Mandela was formed. His royal upbringing taught him leadership, his education gave him knowledge, and his experiences with injustice ignited a lifelong struggle. He was no longer just Rolihlahla, the boy from Vizo. He was becoming Mandela, the freedom fighter, ready to challenge an entire nation and inspire the world. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this story inspiring, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel for more stories of the people who changed our world. Chapter 2. When a young man named Nelson Mandela arrived in Johannesburg in the early 1940s, he stepped into a world that would forever change him, and in turn, a world he would forever change. He wasn't yet the global icon we know today. He was a young man from a rural village, seeking his future in the big city. But what he found in Johannesburg was not just opportunity. It was a harsh, undeniable reality. The city was a brutal classroom, teaching him daily lessons in racial segregation, economic exploitation, and relentless police brutality. Imagine walking through the streets of your own country, only to be treated as a second-class citizen at every turn. This was the daily experience for Black South Africans. Basic rights were a distant dream. As a young law clerk, Mandela had a front-row seat to this systemic injustice. He wasn't just reading about it in books, he was witnessing it firsthand. He saw families, their lives packed into boxes, forcibly removed from homes they had known for generations. He heard the stories of workers, abused and underpaid, with no recourse. He watched as people were arrested, punished, and humiliated for nothing more than the color of their skin. These weren't isolated incidents. They were the threads of a deeply woven fabric of oppression. For Mandela, each case was a personal blow, a stark reminder of the indignity forced upon his people. The quiet observer within him began to stir, replaced by a fire of indignation and a growing determination to act. The injustice was too loud to ignore, the suffering too great to simply witness. The seeds of a revolutionary were being sown, not in a political meeting, but in the heart of a young lawyer who saw the law itself being used as a weapon against his people. In 1944, this growing conviction led him to the doors of the African National Congress, the ANC. At the time, the ANC was the leading political voice for Black South Africans, but its methods were cautious. They wrote petitions, held peaceful protests, and engaged in dialogue, believing that change could be negotiated. But for Mandela and a new generation of young, impassioned activists, this approach felt painfully slow. The system wasn't just flawed, it was designed to oppress. How do you politely ask for your freedom from a system that profits from your subjugation? Mandela and his friends, including future giants of the movement like Walter Sisulu and Oliver Tambo, felt a burning urgency. They saw that petitions were being ignored and peaceful pleas were met with deaf ears or, worse, with violence. They believed that a different path was necessary. This shared frustration and passion for radical change led to a pivotal moment in South African history. That same year, 1944, Mandela, Sisulu, and Tambo co-founded the ANC Youth League. The Youth League wasn't just a new branch of the ANC, it was a new philosophy, a new energy. They were young, they were bold, and they were utterly uncompromising in their demand for freedom. Their core belief was simple and powerful. Freedom is never given voluntarily by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. This was a radical departure from the ANC's older guard. The Youth League was ready for a fight, and they intended to bring the masses along with them. Mandela quickly emerged as a central figure, a powerful voice within this new, dynamic wing of the movement. His legal training gave him a sharp, analytical mind, while his passion gave him a voice that could inspire and mobilize. He was instrumental in drafting the Youth League's manifesto, a document that laid out their vision for a new South Africa. It called for a powerful sense of African nationalism, the right to self-determination, and, most importantly, direct, confrontational resistance to the white minority government. The Youth League's influence began to ripple through the entire organization. Their energy was contagious, their arguments compelling. They challenged the old ways of thinking and pushed the ANC toward a more assertive stance. The tipping point came in 1949 when the ANC officially adopted the Program of Action. This was a direct result of the Youth League's tireless advocacy. The Program of Action was a declaration of war, fought not with guns, but with the collective power of the people. It called for strikes that would cripple the economy, boycotts that would hit the oppressors in their pockets, and widespread acts of civil disobedience that would clog the machinery of the apartheid state. This marked a fundamental shift in the liberation struggle. The era of polite requests was over. The era of mass mobilization had begun, and Nelson Mandela was at the very heart of it. His star was rising rapidly within the ANC. He possessed a rare combination of skills. He was a brilliant organizer, capable of coordinating complex campaigns. He was a captivating speaker, able to inspire courage in the face of fear, and he was a disciplined leader, demanding the same level of commitment from others that he demanded of himself. These qualities made him one of the most effective and respected leaders in the movement. Just as the resistance was escalating, the political climate took a dark and ominous turn. In 1948, the National Party swept to power, and their platform was built on one single, terrifying ideology: apartheid. This wasn't just the continuation of existing segregation. It was its formal, legal, and brutal institutionalization. A flood of new, discriminatory laws was passed, each one designed to tighten the grip of white supremacy and strip away any remaining rights from Black South Africans. The state was building a fortress of racial hierarchy, and it intended to defend it with absolute force. For Mandela and the ANC, this was a clear sign that their struggle was about to become even more perilous. In response, they launched the Defiance Campaign in 1952. It was a nationwide movement of nonviolent resistance, directly targeting the so-called unjust laws of apartheid. Mandela was a central figure, the volunteer-in-chief, traveling across the country to organize and inspire people to defy the state. Thousands of volunteers deliberately broke apartheid laws, like entering whites-only areas or breaking curfews, willingly courting arrest to flood the prisons and expose the moral bankruptcy of the system. As Mandela's profile as a leader grew, so did the government's focus on him. He became a primary target of state surveillance. His movements were watched, his phone was tapped, and his meetings were infiltrated. The government used a legal tool called banning orders to try and silence him. He was banned from attending gatherings, restricted to Johannesburg, and constantly harassed by the police. The state's goal was to isolate him, to cut him off from the movement he was so brilliantly leading. But repression often has the opposite of its intended effect. For Mandela, every act of harassment, every restriction, every threat only served to strengthen his resolve. It was proof that their actions were having an impact, that the state was afraid of the power they were building. The fear tactics didn't break him. They forged him into a more determined and resilient leader. By the mid-1950s, the transformation was complete. The young man who had arrived in Johannesburg a decade earlier was gone. In his place stood a national leader, a symbol of resistance recognized and respected across the country. He was no longer just a lawyer or an activist. He was Nelson Mandela, the face of the fight against apartheid, prepared to challenge the might of the state head-on. The foundation for one of the 20th century's most dramatic and consequential struggles had been laid, and the world would soon learn the name of the man who stood at its epicenter. The journey was far from over. In fact, the most difficult and dangerous years were just ahead. Thank you for watching. If you found this story as inspiring as we do, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next chapter in this incredible story. Chapter 3. By the early 1960s, South Africa was a nation stretched to its breaking point. For nearly 50 years, the African National Congress, the ANC, had championed a path of nonviolent resistance. They organized petitions, boycotts, and peaceful protests, pleading for basic human rights in the face of the oppressive apartheid system. But their calls for justice were met with brutal force. The government responded with mass arrests, beatings, and a legal framework designed to crush any form of dissent. The struggle had reached a bitter stalemate. Peace seemed to be a one-way street, and the path was leading nowhere. Then came March 21st, 1960, the day that changed everything. In the township of Sharpeville, thousands of unarmed demonstrators gathered to protest the hated past laws, which controlled the movement of Black South Africans. They were peaceful, singing freedom songs, but the state's response was merciless. Police opened fire on the crowd, shooting people in the back as they tried to flee. When the smoke cleared, 69 people were dead, and hundreds more were wounded. The Sharpeville massacre sent shockwaves across South Africa and the world. It was a horrifying testament to the regime's brutality. For Nelson Mandela and many others in the liberation movement, Sharpeville was a painful, defining moment. It was the moment the dream of peaceful change died. How could they continue to advocate for nonviolence when the government answered their pleas with live ammunition? The regime's message was clear. There would be no negotiation, no compromise, only submission. In the aftermath of the massacre, the government declared a state of emergency. They didn't just condemn the violence they had caused, they used it as a pretext to eliminate their opposition entirely. The African National Congress and other anti-apartheid groups were officially banned. The political space for legal protest, already shrinking, was slammed shut. Imagine being backed into a corner with no way out. All peaceful avenues exhausted, all doors to dialogue locked and bolted. This was the reality facing Mandela and his comrades. They had tried everything. They had talked, they had marched, they had endured. Now, with their organizations outlawed and their leaders hunted, they faced a stark and agonizing choice: surrender and accept permanent subjugation, or fight back with the only language the apartheid state seemed to understand. After months of intense, secret debate within the now underground ANC, a momentous decision was made. In 1961, Nelson Mandela, along with other key leaders like Walter Sisulu and Joe Slovo, co-founded a new organization, Umkhonto we Sizwe, or MK, which means Spear of the Nation. This was the birth of the ANC's armed wing. It was a radical departure from a half-century of nonviolent tradition, a decision not taken lightly, but born out of desperation and a profound sense of duty. Mandela himself became its first commander-in-chief. But what did armed struggle actually mean? From the very beginning, Mandela was adamant that this was not a war against people. He drew a clear line. The goal was not to cause bloodshed or terrorize civilians, white or black. Instead, Umkhonto we Sizwe would wage a campaign of sabotage. Their targets were to be the symbols and infrastructure of the apartheid state. They would bomb power stations, disrupt communication lines, and hit strategic economic targets. The idea was to cripple the government's ability to function and to make the cost of maintaining apartheid too high. It was a strategic move designed to force the government to the negotiating table, a table they had refused to even set. For Mandela, this wasn't a rejection of peace. It was a tactical shift, a last resort forced upon them by an unyielding and violent regime. He argued that it was the government that had introduced violence into the equation at Sharpeville. The Spear of the Nation was not the first to draw a weapon. It was an answer to a war that had already been declared on them. Mandela's own life transformed overnight. He had to leave his family, his law practice, and his public life behind. He went underground, becoming a fugitive in his own country. He was known as the Black Pimpernel, a master of disguise, constantly on the move to evade the state's security forces. He dressed as a chauffeur, a chef, a garden worker, living in the shadows, coordinating the first sabotage operations of MK. His commitment was total. To build support for the armed struggle, Mandela embarked on a clandestine journey across Africa in early 1962. He met with leaders in Ethiopia, Algeria, Egypt, and other newly independent nations, securing support, funding, and crucial military training for MK's new recruits. He even traveled to London to rally international solidarity. He was building not just an army, but a global coalition against apartheid. But the net was closing in. On August 5, 1962, after 17 months on the run, Mandela's luck ran out. Acting on a tip-off, South African police pulled over a car near the town of Howick. The driver was a man disguised as a chauffeur. It was Nelson Mandela. His capture was a devastating blow to the movement, but it did not break its spirit. He was initially charged with inciting strikes and illegally leaving the country. In court, he refused to be a victim. He defiantly wore traditional Xhosa attire, turning his trial into a platform to challenge the legitimacy of the apartheid legal system itself. He was found guilty and sentenced to 5 years in prison. As Mandela began his sentence, the state's security apparatus was just getting started. In July 1963, they scored their biggest victory yet. Police raided Lily's Leaf Farm in Rivonia, a secret hideout and headquarters for the ANC and MK leadership. It was a treasure trove of evidence. They found documents, including a plan for a potential guerrilla war codenamed Operation Mayabai, and evidence directly linking the leadership, including the already imprisoned Mandela, to the campaign of sabotage. This discovery changed everything. The state now believed it had what it needed to destroy the ANC's leadership once and for all. Mandela was brought from his prison cell to stand trial with 10 of his comrades. This wasn't just another trial. This was the Rivonia trial, a political show trial designed to crush the liberation movement by sending its leaders to the gallows. The charges were sabotage and conspiracy to overthrow the government through violent revolution, charges that carried the death penalty. The world watched. The prosecution presented its case, painting the accused as dangerous terrorists. When it was Mandela's turn to speak, he knew it might be his last chance to address his people and the world. He chose not to testify from the witness box, which would have subjected him to cross-examination. Instead, he delivered a statement from the dock. For 3 hours, he stood and spoke. He didn't just defend himself, he defended the entire struggle for freedom. He meticulously detailed the long history of peaceful protest and the state's violent response. He explained why they had been forced to turn to armed resistance. And then, looking directly at the judge, he delivered the words that would become his defining legacy, words that would echo across the decades and inspire millions. He said, "I have fought against white domination, and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities." And he concluded with a declaration of ultimate commitment. "It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve. But if needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die." There was silence in the courtroom. He had turned his own trial into a trial of the apartheid system itself. The verdict came on June 12, 1964. The men were spared the death penalty, partly due to immense international pressure, but they were sentenced to life in prison. For Nelson Mandela, the iron doors of Robben Island were about to slam shut, beginning a 27-year ordeal. It was the end of his freedom, but it was the true beginning of his journey as a global symbol of the fight for justice. His words from the dock became the moral compass for the anti-apartheid movement, proving that even from behind bars, his voice could never be silenced. Thanks for watching. If you found this story powerful, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into history. Chapter 4. In 1964, a South African courtroom delivered a verdict that was meant to be an ending. Nelson Mandela and his comrades, charged in the Rivonia trial, were sentenced to life imprisonment. The apartheid government thought that by locking away the leaders of the anti-apartheid movement, they could extinguish the flame of resistance. They believed that out of sight would truly mean out of mind. But they were profoundly wrong. Instead of an ending, they created a beginning. They didn't just imprison a man. They created a symbol that would ignite a global movement and inspire generations. Mandela was sent to Robben Island, a name that would become synonymous with both brutality and resilience. This wasn't just a prison. It was a fortress of isolation, a desolate rock surrounded by the cold waters of the Atlantic, just off the coast of Cape Town. Life there was designed to break the human spirit. The days were long and filled with hard, punishing labor in a limestone quarry. The blinding glare from the white rock would permanently damage Mandela's eyesight, a constant physical reminder of the harshness of his environment. The conditions were beyond severe. Prisoners were stripped of their names and reduced to numbers. Mandela was prisoner 466/64. They were given meager rations of food, thin clothing that offered little protection from the island's biting winds, and subjected to constant humiliation. Communication with the outside world was almost non-existent. Visits were rare and short, often conducted through a thick glass pane. Letters were heavily censored, with entire paragraphs blacked out, and sometimes withheld for months. The goal was simple: to make them feel forgotten, to erase their identity and crush their hope. But the architects of apartheid underestimated the power of the human will. In this crucible of suffering, Nelson Mandela did not break. He did not succumb to bitterness or despair. Instead, he embarked on a remarkable journey of self-transformation. He saw the prison not just as a place of confinement, but as an opportunity for growth and reflection. He famously said, "The cell is an ideal place to learn to know yourself." He established a strict, unwavering routine. He would wake up early, exercise in his tiny cell, and then dedicate himself to study. He enrolled in a correspondence course with the University of London and, after years of painstaking effort, earned a law degree from behind bars. But his pursuit of knowledge wasn't just for himself. Mandela believed deeply in the power of education as a tool of liberation. He began to teach his fellow inmates, sharing what he learned, organizing secret classes, and leading discussions on politics, history, and economics. Slowly, against all odds, Robben Island transformed. What was designed as a place of punishment became a center of learning. It earned a new nickname among the inmates: Mandela University. Here, in this harsh environment, political prisoners from different backgrounds came together. They debated strategies, refined their political ideologies, and forged an unbreakable bond of solidarity. They were sharpening their minds, strengthening their resolve, and preparing for a future they still believed was possible. Mandela taught them that even though their bodies were captive, their minds had to remain free. Throughout his imprisonment, Mandela's principles remained unshakable. The government, feeling the growing pressure of international condemnation, made several offers of conditional release. They told him he could walk free, if only he would renounce the armed struggle and accept the government's terms. It was a tempting offer, a chance to see his family, to feel the sun on his face as a free man. But for Mandela, freedom without justice was no freedom at all. He rejected every single offer, sending powerful messages from his cell that his commitment to a free, democratic South Africa was absolute and non-negotiable. He refused to compromise his integrity or the integrity of the movement he represented. As the years stretched into decades, the world did not forget prisoner 466/64. In fact, his stature grew with each passing year. He became a global icon, the living embodiment of the struggle against injustice. The Free Nelson Mandela campaign swept across the globe, with concerts, protests, and political pressure mounting on the apartheid regime. His name was chanted in the streets of London, New York, and Sydney. He became more powerful in prison than he ever could have been outside it. The government had tried to make him invisible, but instead, they had made him a legend. Inside the prison walls, Mandela was honing the very skills he would need to lead his country out of division. He was a man of immense discipline, but he was also a strategist. He recognized that brute force alone would not end apartheid. Reconciliation would be key. In a move that surprised many of his comrades, he began to learn Afrikaans, the language of his oppressors. He studied their history and culture, seeking to understand their fears and their perspective. He knew that to build a new nation, he would have to be able to speak to everyone, including those who had imprisoned him. He was playing the long game, preparing for a future that few could yet imagine. By the late 1980s, the apartheid system was beginning to crumble. Decades of internal resistance, coupled with international sanctions and widespread condemnation, had weakened its foundations. the government knew it could not hold on forever. In secret, they began to reach out to the one man they knew held the key to a peaceful transition, Nelson Mandela. A series of clandestine talks began, laying the groundwork for the end of apartheid. Finally, after 27 long years, the moment arrived. On February 11, 1990, the gates of Victor Verster prison swung open. A 71-year-old Nelson Mandela, hand in hand with his wife Winnie, walked out into the sunlight, a free man. The world watched, holding its breath. What would he say? Would he be a man consumed by revenge, filled with bitterness for the years stolen from him? He was not. He walked out of prison not with a clenched fist of anger, but with an open hand of reconciliation. He stood tall, not as a victim, but as a leader ready to heal a deeply fractured nation. The prison walls had confined his body for nearly 3 decades, but they had failed to imprison his spirit. In fact, they had forged it. The man who emerged was a statesman, a visionary, and a symbol of hope for the entire world. His long walk to freedom was far from over. It was just beginning, and he was ready to lead his people on that journey. Thank you for watching. If this story inspired you, please consider subscribing for more content on the figures who changed our world. See you next time. Chapter 5. February 11th, 1990. A date etched into history. On this day, after 27 long years locked away, Nelson Mandela walked out of Victor Verster prison, a free man. The world watched, holding its breath. He wasn't broken. He wasn't bitter. Hand in hand with his wife Winnie, he emerged with a calm dignity that seemed almost superhuman. Everyone expected a call for revenge, a cry for retribution after decades of suffering. But what they heard was a voice of peace, a call for unity. Mandela's first words as a free man set the tone for the future of an entire nation. He made it clear that South Africa would not be built on the ashes of hatred. Imagine the pressure. One moment you're a political prisoner, the next you're the leader of the African National Congress, steering a country teetering on the brink of civil war. The old, brutal apartheid laws were still in effect. Political violence was exploding in the townships. Decades of deep-seated mistrust poisoned the air. It was a tinderbox, and Mandela was expected to keep it from igniting. His first and most crucial step was to open a dialogue with the man who was his jailer, President F.W. de Klerk. He was utterly convinced that negotiation, not bloodshed, was the only way to dismantle apartheid. These talks were anything but easy. They were fraught with tension, constantly on the verge of collapse. Extremists from both sides were doing everything they could to sabotage the peace process. Think about it. While you're trying to build a new, unified country, there are forces actively working to tear it apart. Assassinations of key figures rocked the nation. Unrest flared up, threatening to derail everything. Yet, through it all, Mandela's resolve never wavered. He held firm to his belief in reconciliation. He taught the world a powerful lesson, that compromise isn't a sign of weakness, but the ultimate expression of strength. He knew that to build a future, you sometimes have to find common ground with your sworn enemy. Slowly but surely, that strength began to yield results. In 1991, a major milestone was reached. The last of the official apartheid laws were repealed. It was a huge victory, but it was just the beginning. The real work lay ahead, crafting a new, democratic constitution that would guarantee rights for all South Africans, regardless of their race. This took years of painstaking negotiations, of give and take, of building trust where there had only been fear. The world recognized the monumental effort being made. In 1993, both Nelson Mandela and F.W. de Klerk were jointly awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. It was a testament to their shared commitment to a peaceful transition, a symbol of hope that even the deepest divides could be bridged. Then came the day that many thought would never arrive. April 27, 1994. For the very first time in South African history, people of all races could vote. The images from that day are unforgettable. Endless lines of people, waiting patiently for hours, sometimes for days, to cast their ballot. Black, white, colored, Indian, all standing together. These lines weren't just about an election. They were about the birth of a new nation. It was a profound, deeply emotional moment that symbolized the triumph of hope over despair. The results were historic. The African National Congress, the party that had been banned for decades, won a landslide victory. Nelson Mandela became the living embodiment of freedom, forgiveness, and the incredible power of reconciliation. His journey from prisoner to president remains one of the most inspiring stories of our time, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, humanity's capacity for good can and will prevail. Chapter 6. In May 1994, a moment arrived that many thought would never come. After centuries of colonial rule and nearly 50 years of brutal apartheid, Nelson Mandela was sworn in as South Africa's first black president. The world watched, holding its breath. Here was a nation on the brink, a society torn apart by racial hatred, systemic inequality, and deep-seated fear. The wounds were fresh, the scars were deep, and the air was thick with tension. Many expected a reckoning, a wave of retribution against the architects of apartheid. But Mandela, a man who had spent 27 years in prison for his fight against the very system he now led, chose a different path. What the world received was not revenge, but a profound lesson in reconciliation. Imagine the scene, a new leader taking power, not with a clenched fist, but with an open hand. One of Mandela's very first decisions was one of his most powerful. He formed a government of national unity. This wasn't just a symbolic gesture, it was a radical act of inclusion. He invited his former political opponents, including the last apartheid-era president, F.W. de Klerk, to serve alongside him. The message was unmistakable and echoed across every corner of the nation. South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white. It was a declaration that the future would not be built on the bitter ashes of the past, but on the shared ground of a common destiny. This act alone began to dismantle the walls of suspicion that had divided the country for so long. Mandela understood a fundamental truth. Political freedom is hollow without social and emotional healing. You can change the laws, but how do you change the hearts of millions? His answer was the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, or the TRC. This was an unprecedented and audacious experiment in restorative justice. It was a national platform for both victims and perpetrators of apartheid's horrors. Victims were given the space to tell their stories, to have their pain acknowledged on a national stage, to finally be heard. For many, this was the first time their suffering was validated. On the other side, perpetrators of politically motivated crimes could apply for amnesty, but only if they gave a full and public confession of their actions. It was truth in exchange for freedom. The TRC was not a magic cure. It couldn't erase the decades of pain, loss, and trauma. The stories that emerged were gut-wrenching, revealing the true depravity of the apartheid system. There were tears, anger, and moments of profound grief. But what the TRC did was extraordinary. It offered a path away from a bloody civil war. Instead of cycles of vengeance, it provided a framework for understanding and, in some cases, forgiveness. It prevented the past from being buried, forcing the nation to confront its demons head-on. This difficult, painful process laid the essential groundwork for national healing, creating a shared history from which a new South African identity could be forged. While mending the nation's soul, Mandela also had to mend its reputation. Under apartheid, South Africa was a pariah state, isolated by international sanctions and moral condemnation. With Mandela's presidency, that changed almost overnight. The world opened its arms, and South Africa was welcomed back into the global community. Embassies reopened, trade resumed, and the nation once again took its seat in international forums. Mandela became a global icon of peace and democracy, a living symbol of humanity's capacity for forgiveness and transformation. His travels abroad weren't just diplomatic missions, they were celebrations of a nation reborn. Perhaps no single event captured this spirit of unity more powerfully than the 1995 Rugby World Cup, held in South Africa. For decades, the national rugby team, the Springboks, and their green and gold jersey were potent symbols of white Afrikaner nationalism and, by extension, apartheid itself. For most black South Africans, the Springboks represented the oppressor. So when Mandela appeared at the final match, wearing the Springbok jersey and a matching cap, it was a moment of breathtaking symbolism. He wasn't just supporting a team. He was embracing a symbol of division and reclaiming it for a new, united nation. When the home team won in a thrilling final, the country erupted in a shared joy that transcended racial lines. In that moment, there weren't black or white South Africans. There were just South Africans celebrating together. It was a masterstroke of political theater, a powerful message of unity that resonated far beyond the stadium walls. But goodwill and symbolism alone couldn't solve the monumental economic challenges Mandela's government inherited. The legacy of apartheid was a society of staggering inequality. A small white minority controlled the vast majority of the country's wealth, land, and resources. Millions of black South Africans lived in abject poverty, with little access to proper housing, education, healthcare, or employment. The task was enormous: to dismantle this economic apartheid and build a more equitable society from the ground up. Mandela's government launched ambitious programs to expand access to electricity, clean water, and housing. They focused on building a social safety net for the most vulnerable. Progress was undeniably slow, and the challenges were immense. Transforming an economy so deeply structured by racial privilege was not the work of a single presidential term. The deep-rooted problems of poverty, unemployment, and crime persisted, and for many, the tangible benefits of democracy were slow to arrive. Yet, what Mandela's leadership provided during this fragile transition was something just as crucial: stability and hope. In a time of immense uncertainty, he was a steady hand, a source of moral clarity and unwavering optimism. He gave people a reason to believe in the future, to believe in the rainbow nation he so eloquently described. His presence assured the world that South Africa was on a path of peaceful, democratic change, which in turn encouraged the investment and support the country desperately needed. In an era where many leaders cling to power, Mandela made another choice that solidified his legacy. True to his democratic principles and his promise, he chose to serve only one term as president. In 1999, he gracefully stepped down, ensuring a peaceful and orderly transfer of power to his successor. This act was a powerful statement in itself, setting a profound example for leadership across Africa and the rest of the world. He showed that true leadership isn't about personal longevity or the accumulation of power, but about service to one's people and the strengthening of democratic institutions. He left office with his integrity intact and his status as a global statesman secured. When we look back on Nelson Mandela's presidency, we see it wasn't defined by dominance or raw political power. It was defined by something far more potent: moral authority, deep humility, and an unwavering commitment to service. He led not with the instruments of fear, but with the power of forgiveness. He commanded respect not with force, but with a quiet, unshakable courage forged in the crucible of struggle. He understood that to lead a divided people, you must first show them how to be human to one another. Nelson Mandela's 5 years as president were more than just a political term. They were a demonstration that leadership rooted in humanity, compassion, and reconciliation can genuinely change the course of history. He left behind not just a transformed nation, but a timeless lesson for us all. Thanks for watching. If you found this story as inspiring as we do, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. When we think of great leaders, we often think of power, armies, and empires. But Nelson Mandela's greatness wasn't found in any of those things. It was rooted in something far more profound: his unwavering belief in principle. At the very core of his philosophy was a deep conviction in human dignity, equality, and freedom for every single person. For Mandela, the idea of liberty was simple. It couldn't be a privilege reserved for just one group. He famously said that true freedom required the liberation of both the oppressed and the oppressor. Because in his eyes, hatred wasn't a weapon. It was a prison that trapped the soul of the person who held it. This powerful idea shaped his entire approach to leadership. Imagine spending 27 years in prison for fighting against a brutal system. What would be your first instinct upon release? For most, it might be revenge. But Mandela chose a different path: forgiveness without forgetting. He understood that for South Africa to have a future, it couldn't remain chained to its painful past. He championed reconciliation, not as a sign of weakness, but as the ultimate display of strategic and moral strength. It was the only way to heal a deeply divided nation. This wasn't just a political strategy, it was a reflection of his belief in servant leadership. He saw his role not as a privilege to dominate, but as a solemn duty to uplift others. This is why, after becoming South Africa's first democratically elected president, he made the remarkable decision to serve only one term. He wanted to strengthen the country's new democratic institutions, proving that no single person was more important than the system itself. His influence didn't stop at South Africa's borders. Globally, Nelson Mandela became a powerful symbol of resistance against injustice and a tireless advocate for peace. His story inspired human rights movements, racial equality campaigns, and social justice efforts all around the world. He taught us that courage isn't about the absence of fear, but the triumph over it, and that the most meaningful victory isn't found in defeating your enemies, but in transforming your relationship with them. Today, Nelson Mandela's legacy is alive and well. We see it in democratic institutions that stand firm against tyranny. We see it in peace-building efforts that bring former enemies together. And we feel it in the enduring belief that change is always possible, even when the odds seem completely insurmountable. His life is a testament to the idea that compassion can coexist with strength, and that justice never has to be fueled by hatred. Nelson Mandela didn't just challenge the evil of apartheid. He fundamentally redefined what it means to be a leader for the entire world. His story reminds us that one person, armed with principle and an unbreakable spirit, can truly change the course of history. Thank you for watching. If you were inspired by this story, please like, share, and subscribe for more content on the figures who shaped our world. Have you ever wondered what it takes to change the world? Is it power? Is it wealth? Or is it something deeper, something that can't be bought or broken? Today, we're talking about a man who answered that question not with words, but with his life, Nelson Mandela. His story is more than just history. It's a masterclass in courage, forgiveness, and what it truly means to be human. Mandela's journey was an epic saga, stretching from the rolling hills of the Eastern Cape to the cold, hard floor of a prison cell, and finally, to the highest office in his nation. He was a man who stared into the abyss of injustice, a system designed to crush his spirit, and he refused to break. For 27 years, locked away on Robben Island, his body was confined, but his mind, his vision for a free South Africa, remained boundless. Think about that for a moment. Nearly 3 decades stolen. Most would emerge consumed by bitterness, hungry for revenge. But Mandela emerged with something far more powerful, a heart full of compassion. When he walked out of prison, the world held its breath. South Africa was a powder keg, teetering on the edge of civil war. Would he call for vengeance against the architects of apartheid, the very people who had imprisoned him? No. In one of history's most profound acts of leadership, he chose a different path. He chose reconciliation. He chose unity. He reached out his hand to his former oppressors, not in weakness, but in an incredible display of strength. He understood that to build a new nation, you couldn't be shackled by the hatreds of the old one. Mandela showed the world that true leadership isn't about the title you hold or the power you wield. It's measured by your capacity to heal. His courage wasn't just in fighting against an unjust system. It was in his ability to forgive those who had enforced it. He taught us that forgiveness is not about forgetting the past. It's about not letting the past dictate the future. South Africa's freedom wasn't some historical accident. It was earned. It was paid for with sweat, with tears, and with the immense personal sacrifice of people like Mandela, who gave not just their years, but their entire lives to the cause of justice. So why does his story still resonate so deeply with us today? Because it holds timeless lessons. It challenges us in our own lives. How do we respond to injustice when we see it? Do we turn away, or do we confront it with courage? When we have the upper hand, do we lead with ego or with humility? And in our own conflicts, big or small, do we seek retribution, or do we search for a path to reconciliation? Mandela's life is a constant reminder that these are not just political questions, they are deeply personal ones. He didn't just help dismantle a racist regime. He provided a blueprint for how humanity can rise above its darkest impulses. He showed us that even after the most bitter conflicts, healing is possible, that a shared future is always within reach if we have the moral fortitude to pursue it. Nelson Mandela wasn't just the father of a new South Africa. He became a moral compass for the entire world, a conscience for all of humanity. His legacy isn't a monument of stone, but a living, breathing idea. The idea that hope, courage, and an unwavering belief in the good of others can, in fact, change the world. Thank you so much for watching. If Mandela's story inspires you, share this video to keep his legacy alive. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of incredible lives that shaped our world. See you in the next one.